Gary Stevenson made millions betting on the gap between the rich and the poor getting bigger. Since then, he's set up the phenomenal YouTube channel Gary's Economics, in which he explains what's going on in our economy and advocates in favor of massive redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor, like some sort of Cockney Robin Hood. Now, before we get into what makes him such an original and interesting communicator, if you're new to this channel, please do subscribe now and don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Okay, let's get into it.
I wanted to do a video about a concept which I've been calling the illusion of improvement. This idea is
Okay, so first of all, the clothes that he's wearing is just kind of, he's got that little hat up on his head. He's got fingerless gloves. He looks a little bit like a kind of market trader crossed with a member of E17, if you remember the brilliant 90s boy band. And personally, I'm all for it.
about a kind of a philosophical question, which is, can it be possible for every single individual in a society to be getting richer over time, and yet for society as a whole and for families as a whole to be getting poorer over time? And this is an important concept, I think, because in my opinion, definitely people in this country, the UK and many Western countries, have been getting continually poorer for at least the last 20 years or so. And yet, if you look at most individuals, you will find that over time, they do tend to get richer over time. And that is because...
Okay, so he's now laying out his concept. He's talking about the fact that people over time get richer, but society over time is getting poorer. And that's kind of a paradoxical sort of concept, but he's laying it out. He did it once very quickly, then he's done it again, and he's kind of repeating it just to lay it out and to get you familiar with what he's trying to say. And he's doing it in a really nice, easygoing way.
Because in most careers, you get salary rises as you get older, and many people are able to accumulate a little bit of cash and buy property, which makes them richer over time. So how is it possible?
Just another little point. He keeps picking his nose, he's kind of scratching his chest. None of these things really matter. I know that when people do public speaking, they're always hypersensitive about little physical tics that they might have. But really, these sort of things, you can really overplay them. If your message is interesting and if you're getting that across in a way that is able to be received by the audience, then these little things that people sometimes do, they're not as important as perhaps we think themselves to be.
That individuals are getting richer, and yet society as a whole is getting poorer. So I think the best way to explain what's happening here is through a graph.
Love a graph.
We don't do many graphs or diagrams on this channel, but I think this diagram here explains really nicely what is happening. So on this graph, you've got time on the x-axis and you've got living standards on the y-axis. So, and what you have is 4 separate generations over time. And if you look at these 4 generations, you can see each generation over time is getting richer, but their children are also getting richer over time, but from a lower starting point and reaching a lower end point. So each generation over time is getting poorer, but each individual person is getting richer. And I think...
Okay, let's just wind that chart back. Okay, so this is super interesting. As a graph, it's always, when you're doing a visual in some sort of presentation or a talk, bringing charts and graphs in, it can be really useful, but it can also be kind of complicated and difficult to comprehend by the audience. But this chart here is just super simple, 4 lines, 2 axes, bang, bang, time, living standards, and you can see exactly what he's trying to talk about. No frills, no fuss, but the point is getting made.
But each individual person is getting richer. And I think this describes really well what is happening now. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because another thing which I've been talking about a lot on the channel is we have seen in the last 15, 20, well, to be honest, 30 or 40 years, a very aggressive increase in house prices and other asset prices. And I suspect we will see very aggressive house prices in the next few years. Now, what is interesting about this is this This economic action, the increase of house prices, it really bankrupts families over time because each generation finds it harder and harder to buy a house. They have to pay more rent, they have to pay more interest because they need bigger mortgages. But if you look at individual people, they will normally tell you when house prices rise, it's good.
Just a physical point there. Where we've paused it there, you can see he's bringing his hands in because that's when he's starting to talk about personal stuff. But he's got this very nice, easygoing, dynamic way of using his hands, which kind of shows his passion, shows his interest, but it also just helps to tell the story when he talks about people getting richer, but society getting poorer. Just very simple physical things. When he's talking about big issues, he seems to open his hands out. And then when it's personal issues, he's bringing his hands in. And he's probably not even thinking about this, but it's very nice way of just giving you a visual cue to understand, again, what he's talking about.
So we have an action which is impoverishing families, and yet most individuals within those families think this is good for me. So I think it's really important for people to understand this diagram, essentially. What is important to understand is if you want to understand how your family is doing, how your community is doing, how your society is doing financially.
Again, a nice physical point there. He's looking away, looking away, and then he turns when he's talking about financially, because that's the word that he really wants you to comprehend, and it wants you to land that this is what he's talking about, is your financial situation. And so that kind of looking away and then coming back to the camera to make your point, it's a beautiful technique.
Enough to look at just yourself and your path over time, or even you and your kids and your path over time. What you need to do is compare your kids to you at their age and your grandkids at their age. So if we go back to the graph, if you look at the living standards for young people, so I'll put 4X on the graph here, which marks each generation when they were young. And you can see that each generation when they were young is getting poorer over time. If we do the same thing for middle age, again, middle-aged people are getting poorer over time. The elderly, again, getting poorer over time. Despite the fact that each individual generation is getting richer over time, it's very important that you do this if you want to understand the future of your family and your communities. You need to compare generations when they were the same age. Once we understand this, we can start to sort of get rid of the division which is increasingly happening between elderly and the young when it comes to voting. I think elderly people see that their lives are getting better over time. They assume their kids' lives will get better over time, and they fail to realize that despite things like increasing house prices, which benefit them but hurt their kids, the long-term trajectory for their family, for their kids, for their community is increased poverty over time. Now that raises an interesting question, which is, well, if all families or the vast majority of families are getting poorer over time, but society as a whole is not getting poorer, GDP is not decreasing, then where is all of that missing wealth going? And to explain that, we're going to add one other line on this graph here, which is living standards of the rich over time. So as ordinary families are getting poorer, they're losing their wealth. The rich are getting richer at the fastest rate ever in history, and their living standards are dramatically increasing.
And again, he's just come back to the graph. Same thing. We've landed the concept of those 4 lines, and now he's just adding one simple thing, which is the rich, the super rich, and their income's going up. And I suppose the interesting thing about Gary's economics as well is that he is part of that very rich group. He's a trader. He's earned millions of pounds. He's definitely in that kind of 1%, 2% bracket, and that allows him that perspective coming from a working class background to see both that kind of ordinary person aspect, but also what is going on at that super elite level.
It's really important to understand this because in the next 10, 20 years, house prices are going to go through the roof, and especially a lot of older generations who maybe own property are going to feel that they're winning. And they're often going to fail to realize that the consequence is their kids and their grandkids are being made poorer. If we can get enough people to recognize this, then we can get together and we can say we don't accept this. We don't accept a situation where wealth flows from ordinary families to the very rich, where living standards continually decrease over time. If we don't realize this, then it will happen and we will fall into a situation where the vast majority of families fall into poverty over time. We can reverse it. The only way to do that is by making rich people pay their fair share instead of taxing everybody who's working hard for their money. We're going to keep pushing for it. We hope you support us. watch this video again.
And now he's kind of coming back round to his call to action. So in communications campaigns, we always talk about what's the call to action. And what, again, I like about him is he is campaigning. He wants to change society in a sort of quite a fundamental way. He wants to tax the rich a whole lot more than they are at the moment. And he's part of that group that he's calling to be taxed much, much more. But the way he's getting his message across, I think, is the critical thing here. Is he's just doing it in a nice, gentle, easy way. He's laid out his facts, he's laid out his concepts, and he's just saying, if you agree with me, come with, and we can do something about it. And I think this is so much better than the kind of much more aggressive, shouty way of trying to get people to do something.
Again, share it with your friends, share it with your family, send it to your mum, send it to your nan. Let's fight back. Let's not accept poverty for ordinary people. Thank you.
Okay, so we've seen Gary's economics, and I was really impressed by how he got his argument across. I've probably got a little bit of a man crush on him, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. But let's be more professional and break down exactly why I think he's a terrific communicator. So, first of all, no, fingerless gloves. No, I'm not saying not the fingerless gloves, but I do like the way that he just is himself. He dresses how he dresses. He talks how he talks. It's so unforced. It's so natural. And being yourself like that is kind of hard to do because we always feel these sort of societal pressures to dress how other people dress and talk in a received pronunciation accent or whatever it is. But he is a real good example of someone who's got a regional accent and he sticks to it, and it really does enhance the experience for the viewer. Secondly is how he manages to get across a complex economic concept. Now, he does this through lots of different subtle things. First of all, lay it out quickly and simply and early, then go back into it, introduce a visual, then go into more depth, then kind of recap at the end. So he's probably running through the concept 4 or even 5 times in a 5-minute video. The third point is around the call to action and how he gets that across. And a lot of calls to actions in different communications campaigns, they can feel quite aggressive, a bit pushy. You can feel a little bit hounded by it. But with him, it all feels kind of easy. He's just saying, here's the argument. Here's what's going on in society. If you're not happy with that, then let's do something about it together. Tell your nan, tell your mum. It all feels very nice, very charming. But actually, he's bringing you on a ride that is trying to change society in a really deeply rooted way. So for me, overall, in 5-6 minutes, he's done so much there. He's allowed you to understand something that's kind of sophisticated and difficult. It's probably a lot more complex than what he's actually laying out. Of course it is. Economics is always going to have different layers of complexity, but he gives the right level of complexity for what we need to know to just be more aware of what is going on at a big picture level in our society. I'd love to know what you think, so please do put comments down below, both about his communication style and about what his arguments are. And do share this video, do comment, and if you can, please do press that subscribe button. Okay, see you again soon for another video breaking down the comms skills of different speakers from across the world. Cheerio.